The fallout from the collapses of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank is now affecting other major banks, including the second largest bank in Switzerland, Credit Suisse. US President Joe Biden has pledged to do whatever is needed to avoid an American banking crisis.
Every American should feel confident that their deposits will be there if and when they need them. Second, the management of these banks will be fired. If the bank is taken over by FDIC, the people running the bank should not work there anymore. Third, investors in the banks will not be protected. They knowingly took a risk, and when the risk didn't pay off, investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works.
Sky News Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief Annelise Nielsen joins me live now from San Diego. Annelise, it's been a big day for you, a long day. You've been there since the announcement early this morning. The US Federal Reserve is launching a review now into the failures that contributed to the banking collapse. There's now instability in the sector. How concerned are authorities about more financial institutions or banks going insolvent?
Look, they are extremely concerned, and this is why we've seen them move so quickly on this. And the fact that Joe Biden put in this extra statement that he made this morning around 9 a.m. local time, just to edge in before the markets opened, there was a real concern that the markets were going to open and it was going to be catastrophic. There were concerns there would be runs on other banks and we'd see lines out the doors of people trying to get their deposits back. I think the lesson's been learned that this can happen all quite quickly, the unravelling, and that's where the White House wanted to be on the front foot with this. You've also got a few really influential players on Capitol Hill right now in banking. You've got Elizabeth Warren, has the ear of the Biden administration. She's been a very strong advocate around consumer rights for a long time, and Tim Scott, the Republican senator on the banking committee, is quite an influential voice among Republicans as well, and touted as a potential candidate for president at this election as well. So there is a strong appetite to make sure this doesn't run out of control. And those pictures, especially of people lining up at the Silicon Valley Bank to try to get their deposits back, really did spook people. So to the pity of many of the people trying to make this the big story of the US today, it really wasn't. It was overshadowed, at least domestically, by this concern around the banking sector.
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely correct. And the banking sector, the ramifications globally are significant. There's much debate now, as you refer to, about what led to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in particular. How is the Reserve Bank under fire for raising rates too aggressively? Is that what most people are blaming for this?
Well, I think there's a conflation of factors here. I think the net zero interest rate loans that were really the focus in the early days of the Silicon Valley Bank has been a concern here, that was unsustainable. We're starting to look at some factors that are eerily similar to the global financial crisis and were supposed to be regulated more strongly. We're talking about perhaps some state-level regulations not coming into the full force here when we're talking about the federal government coming in and regulating here. It does seem like they were hampered by some of the local freedoms that were allowed in California, and that will be investigated. But just one of the other interesting things is how much this bank deposited by startups during the pandemic time expanded so rapidly. Where did all this money come from? I think that's going to be another question that people are going to be asking. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of areas that people are going to look at for accountability, including at SVB, and why did they so vastly underestimate how often and how early these startups would need access to their own capital. Annelise Nielsen, let's move on to AUKUS. You were there when Albanese stood alongside Biden and SUNAK today. There were many other dignitaries in the crowd as well. We saw Kurt Campbell, we saw the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, the new US Ambassador to Australia, Caroline Kennedy, who of course is the daughter of John F. Kennedy. What was it like on the ground? What was the atmosphere like? Was there a sense that this is really a very significant moment and investment, not just for Australia, but for the United States and Britain as well?
Absolutely. There was a sense that it was quite orchestrated. This was a moment that they did want to make for TV. The fact they brought the submarine in from Pearl Harbor, so there was that visual. You had quite a almost breathtaking moment when you had all the sailors coming out, standing to attention for their commander-in-chief. And I mean, as much as you can say that's a manufactured moment, it's manufactured for a reason. And to have three different nations, the United Kingdom, the United States and Australia, come together for an announcement of this significance, it is a big moment because it shows that this is the next step in the US trying to maintain some kind of influence in the Indo-Pacific. And this is really important, not just in a security sense, but a trade sense as well. We saw how disrupted supply chains came undone so easily during the pandemic. That is the big fear. If there's any kind of aggression from China to move into that space, we could be facing a catastrophe that makes this banking crisis look pretty minute. And to see that the US is putting this show on, it is a big statement. And the big statement, of course, from the Australian side is how much money we're putting down. This is a huge investment on our part.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk to Andrew Hastings in a moment about how we're going to fund that. But just very quickly, Annelise, before you go, China is obviously the undercurrent to the AUKUS announcement today. You've mentioned in the past couple of days that when Australia first raised the prospect of nuclear-powered subs several years ago, the idea was kind of laughed off in the United States. Do you get the sense here that the US was too slow to recognise the extent of the threat China posed in the Indo-Pacific?
I think the US has been quite on top of how serious a threat the US is. I think that, how serious a threat China is in a security sense. I think that was counterbalanced really strongly with how much economic benefit they were receiving from China at the time, and that there was this focus on free trade. I think one of the reasons that Australia was kind of laughed off was that we weren't taken seriously around being able to take control of something as serious as nuclear propulsion technology. We're not being given nukes here, but we are being given some pretty sensitive technology that goes to the heart of just how powerful the US is as a superpower. And so what's escalated in this time is that we've shown that we can be trusted in that sense. We've shown that we can be sophisticated technological actors. And I think also just how Australia has conducted itself during the pandemic, that we have been strong advocates of rules-based order, all that kind of thing has been heard quite clearly in the United States.
Yeah. Annelise, Nielsen, thank you very much for staying up so late to chat to us and bring us that news.